Welcome to the Stronger for Business podcast with Dyfrig Jenkins, Pete Rushmer, and myself, Bev Thorogood. Stronger for Business is a training consortium dedicated to bringing high-quality training solutions to businesses through the combined expertise of our partners. From skills training to developing personal and professional excellence, our mission is to help business owners get the very best from their people at all levels, from boardroom to shop floor. The Stronger for Business podcast is our opportunity to share our knowledge, thoughts and ideas with you, the listener. You'll get to meet some awesome guests from across the business world, sharing their experience of learning and development. If you love what we have to say, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to consume your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for discussion topics or ideas for future guests. And if you really love what you hear, please do consider leaving us a 5-star review, as this helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience. Sit back and enjoy the Stronger for Business podcast.
Hello everybody, welcome to Stronger for Business podcast. This is episode 12 already. For those of you that have been listening for a while, thanks for joining us again. For those of you that are new, welcome. You're very, very welcome, and hopefully you'll find this interesting and beneficial, and you'll stick around for future podcasts too. Today, Pete and Bev and I are joined by Catherine Lynch. Catherine, in her previous roles, has been Chief People Officer at Virgin Media, at Tailgate Insurance, BGR Group, and Barclaycard as well. And we'll chat with Catherine in just a second about all the things that are going on in the world of business and employment. These are uncertain times, as we all know. Quickly then, before we start talking with Catherine, just want to say quickly hi to Bev and Pete.
Hiya.
How are you guys?
Hello.
Yeah, what's been great for you guys this week?
Go on, Bev, you go first.
Thank you. What's been great for me? Well, I got to see you guys in person. That was a real bonus. First time in three months, I think. We actually got together in your training room, Pete, which was really, really lovely. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I think there's been a little bit of because we've been so distanced, there was almost a little bit of, is it going to be the same when we get back together? Are we going to have a bit of sort of bedding in time, so to speak, bit of settling in time? And it wasn't. It was just like we'd seen each other yesterday, which of course we had on Zoom, but being back in the same room there's something about the energy that you get from being in the same room as somebody that you just don't get on Zoom. So that was lovely. What else has been going on? I'm on a bit of a health kick, so I've started fasting a couple of days a week. So if you get me on a fast day, I might be a bit grumpy. But today's not a fast day. I get to eat today, so I'm happy. But yeah, it's good. There's been too much sitting around and eating junk over the last 3 months, so I'm getting myself on track.
Cool. What about you, Pete?
Definitely won't be catching me fasting anytime soon. There's 100 kilos of pure man to eat food for. I couldn't manage it, I don't think. So do you know what? You're absolutely right. A bit of social anxiety for us getting together, but wasn't it amazing? It was so good. All of us getting together. I really, really enjoyed that this week. But yeah, for me, things have just got busier and busier, which is really good. And I'm not sort of saying that in any other way than it's just I feel very lucky to be in a position where working our way out of this situation, and we've just finished month end for June, and actually in just over 2 years of business, it's actually the best month we've had.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Which is incredible, right? So, just keep cracking on. If you asked me how it happened, I couldn't tell you. So, we'll just take the wins, and hopefully I'll be able to systemize it and get it right moving forward. But yeah, no, we had a really good month, so I'm really chuffed.
I think it's helping because you've been working really hard at it as well, because you've been plugging away all the time, and you've gone through the rebrand exercise recently with the new values. And the mission for the business as well. So it's not like you've not been sitting around doing nothing, in fairness, for the last 3 months.
No, that's exactly it. And I think that probably leads us quite well into the conversation today about making sure that, the temptation might be to sort of slow things down, but actually it's important to really gear up in those situations when you face some adversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think the highlight for me this week, there's been a few of them, but actually seeing you guys in person, yeah, that was great. And it really was, like Bev said, having the energy of just the three of us in the room, and it was really creative a couple of hours as well. So we've got some really good stuff planned in for the future. Some really good ideas for some future podcasts, as well as the non-podcast things that we will do, especially as we start to come out of lockdown as well. I've been on a few forums this week as well, listening from politicians and council people, as well as leaders in business and organisations, and really listening to their viewpoint about what's going on as well. And there seems to be more and more consistency about what people are thinking about. And one of the underlying things is that it is still going to be so complex and so uncertain over the next couple of months, for at least 6 months, probably for a year. And that seems to be really, really consistent now. So, if our listeners didn't know it, regardless of where they are in the world, we're definitely in for the long haul with COVID. It's not going to be over this calendar year, this financial year. I think it's going to be around for a while. So this conversation then, it starts to dig a little bit deeper. That we'll have a look from the top, the viewpoint from the top, if you like, from Catherine. In business, it's often called the helicopter view because it's looking at the whole organisation and the whole industry sometimes. So Catherine, welcome. It's really good to have you here. For those of you that don't know, Catherine and I have worked together twice in the past. So it's a personal pleasure as well as a professional pleasure to have you here. I think it might be really helpful just to for you just to give people an overview of kind of how you've got here to date, if you like, and then maybe we'll just start talking about what's going on out there in the jobs market and in these uncertain times.
Yeah, thank you, Deverick, and good to be here. So until recently, I was the Chief People Officer at Virgin Media. It's owned by Liberty Global, a US-based cable company. Liberty Global have owned Virgin Media about 6 years, and they have businesses across mostly across Europe. And they divested some businesses last year as they looked to reshape their portfolio ahead of the recent merger with O2 that was announced. Unfortunately, part of that restructuring saw some management changes, and I was made redundant at the end of the year from the job that I was doing, and left the business in April. Mm-hmm. So formally, as you say, we worked together, Dev, at both Barclaycard, where I was as the European HR director before taking my first group HRD role some 7 years ago now at a smaller business called BGL Group. Not terribly well known, but for those who take their insurance with Compare the Market, you'll know those little friendly meerkats, and that's the business that BGL founded some years ago. After BGL, where I was for 3 very happy years, I moved to Towergate Insurance, which was a private equity-backed aggregator. But that wasn't really my happy place, so I moved on to Virgin. So yeah, I've predominantly been in financial services, although there's a definite digital and technology theme flowing through the businesses that I've had the privilege to lead. Yeah. So I'm now in a situation where I find myself like very many others, and I think this is where it's very topical. Our conversation is going to go today. In a job market in a very uncertain and ambiguous times, I think this is only going to get worse. The World Health Organization have said this week, we're just at the beginning of the COVID crisis. So I think we're, yet to see the full extent to which the economy will see unemployment rising as furlough comes to an end later this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess this isn't a hypothetical conversation because, as you just alluded to, you were made redundant at the time when it just seems like ancient history now, where we're going through a second Brexit vote. We had the elections in the UK, then there's Christmas, and then the New Year, and then in no time at all, almost January and February almost didn't exist because then obviously COVID was bubbling away in the Far East and then migrated across the world, as we now know, really, really quickly. So, this is a conversation that is real for you. Catherine, as it is for many people. So in the week that we're recording this in the UK, more than 12,000 redundancies have been announced with some quite major firms, and we all expect that to carry on as well. Unemployment is massive in the US, excuse me, and as it is in other European countries and other countries around the world as well. So it's really interesting, actually, that you just mentioned the WHO, and they are kind of predicting really tough times ahead. So from your perspective as a former chief people officer, what can businesses and organizations kind of expect as we go into the next 12 months and maybe beyond that?
Yeah, no, I do think we're going to see unprecedented levels of unemployment, and therefore a real strain on public services, because people will be seeking support, financial support, as I said, as the furlough ends, and companies therefore cannot afford to keep those on the payroll. Whether it's retail outside of the food industry that's really struggling, and a trend that's accelerating because of the crisis, or the hospitality industry, or the travel and tourism businesses. That in those areas definitely we'll see issues. But I mean, personally, I was seeing a contraction in the market anyway, with organisations either slimming down some of those non-frontline positions, combining roles. So in my instance, transformation and HR, or strategy and HR, seeing two exco roles crash together, in executive committee roles crashed into one. An increasing trend is promoting from within. So a number of businesses where I've seen movement and been proactive and reached out to either the CEO or a chair or a former chief people officer, CHRO colleague, finding that actually, no, the business was deciding to, go with a vice president rather than a managing director type role. So what was, already a tough space, as you say, post-election and political uncertainty and Brexit, as businesses tighten their belt, has just accelerated. So I think we're going to see more business startups. I think people will seek to be creative and innovate and try and work for themselves potentially. Probably, as we saw in the financial crisis, an increase in interim roles and an increase in contractual roles, especially as IR35 has been pushed out for the moment, rather than people adding permanently to their workforces.
I just ask a quick question, Catherine. So, do you think there's a danger with so many potential redundancies that companies may, shall we say, fall foul of staying compliant with the rules and regulations?
Very, very good question, Bev. Well, we're already seeing some of it. I don't want to name names, but the press has been fairly clear about organisations that have taken advantage of the situation as opposed to others. It seems to be on a bit of a spectrum. And I'll quote Unilever as a positive example, where they have used purpose and sustainability on the back of the crisis by ramping up, and some of the food businesses haven't they? Feed the Nation, a call to arms, particularly for frontline shop floor workers and warehouse distribution workers. For every good example, sadly there are others who haven't, and are putting huge numbers of people into a redundant situation and then asking them to reapply for their jobs on much reduced terms and conditions. That's the worst side of business, isn't it? When we would like to think responsible and ethical leadership would be at the fore. And that's a key role for someone in my position, is to hold the mirror up and call out some of those poor examples and behaviours, and hopefully influence businesses and business leaders to behave appropriately. I think that the real cost of it is not just financial, though. It's the stress and anxiety that being in uncertain times and out of work brings. And I'm sure, Pete, you all have examples of how your team have helped people cope with the mental health fallouts of losing your role, and or the continuous stress of trying to find a new job. The application process can be quite difficult. constantly interviewing and then being rejected. It's a difficult situation people will find themselves in.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
having. Oh, sorry, Pete.
Sorry, Bev. No, you go. Ladies first.
Oh, bless you. I was just going to say, actually, I was having a very interesting conversation yesterday with a career coach, and she works predominantly with the sort of the older end of the labour market, and she had concerns about the fact that, with so many redundancies potentially in train, the amount of people who've maybe worked for the same company for maybe 25, 30 years, and now they're finding themselves being made redundant, and the panic around, when they, certainly when I first applied for my job with the MOD, you filled in an application in paper and you sent it through the post. And I think for many older people now, and when I say older, I'm not necessarily mean sort of very old, but sort of 45 plus, if they've not applied for a job for a long, long time, it's the online process, the telephone interviews, Zoom interviews, could be potentially really quite daunting, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Pete, were you going to ask a question or make a comment?
Sorry about that.
Absolutely, yeah. No, so I think one of the situations that I've come across, the mental health element of the training that we offer has become quite popular over the last few weeks. We've had a lot of inquiries from business leaders to come and speak to their teams about the situation. And there's a couple of factors which are sort of predominantly overriding, certainly in the previous work that I've done in online sessions and sort of moving forward. And that's the anxiety physically over the situation that we face, and the fear that people find themselves in of contracting an illness or even often not for themselves, but actually what they may do to their families by passing it on. So there's a lot of anxiety there from a health and safety point of view. And then there's also the sort of resilience element of the business or the financial impact that it could have. I sort of put myself back 12 weeks now to the beginning of lockdown on a conversation that I had with my dad. Now, our outlook on work life is very different, that of mine and my dad. My dad joined the police at 19 and retired at 49, 30 years later with a final salary pension scheme, his mortgage paid, 1,000% increase on the value of his house. And I decided at 32, just as my corporate career was taking off, to start a business with 4 children. And the conversation was along the lines of, Dad still perceives that there's a job for life, that you would go and find the career and you would do a job for life. And the reality is, and you'd pay into a pension and you'd end up having a pension paid to you in the future. And the reality is that actually that isn't the case anymore. And certainly people who are in the roles that I was doing in corporate life are currently being made redundant. And yes, I was in a position now where I run a training business. And actually that's often one of the things that gets cut quite early when in times of difficulty. And we had a frank conversation around the irresponsibility that I had towards my family for running a business. And I just thought it'd be quite interesting to hear your point of view on sort of how that security element of a role has changed and how people need to come to terms with that. And then I'll move on in a bit to maybe talk about the resilience that we need moving forward. But I'm interested in your input on that, Catherine, and how the job market has changed so much.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because as you were talking, I'm thinking of my own circumstances, and it's in reverse. So my father was self-employed and had his own business his entire life, and unfortunately, through the creation of the out-of-town supermarkets, his fruit and vegetable wholesale business potentially, during the mid-80s went completely bust. And so I have always pursued roles in corporate organisations, perceiving them to be safer. And yet more recently, obviously, I was made redundant and through no performance of my own or issue. It was a restructuring and my role fell away as 2 roles were combined. And that doesn't feel fair, and it certainly didn't feel safe. And so I think that it's actually a full turnaround. Perhaps it will be businesses that are the self-employed that people have set up that provide more security for people's families. Look, I think there's room for both, but I do think it's a responsibility of all job holders to keep their skills fresh, build resilience into their skill sets. So I've been retraining recently to become an agile practitioner. I'm going through some online Scrum Master training, and I hope to be accredited in the next few weeks, because that was a skill set that I didn't have. I was increasingly trying to see the HR team work in more agile ways, more quickly in short sprints, particularly in the centres of expertise, the sort of central roles. But actually, if I have the opportunity to go back into a Chief People Officer role, which I hope to in the future, I will probably turn the HR function fully agile to make it smaller, more nimble, more adaptable, more multi-skilled. I think the roles will be more engaging and enjoyable. The people will become more flexible and adaptable. And actually, the responsibility of all of us is to, help our businesses be more sustainable and more efficient, and therefore bring fewer but better roles. Now, clearly, that sees other roles and other work maybe potentially being created elsewhere. But I think there's this resilience, this business resilience and individual resilience is quite interesting.
Yeah, I think there's going to be quite a challenging paradox actually, as larger organisations cut their cloth according to the financial impact that they've seen, and actually the skills gap of people who are falling out of business, like yourself, you've proactively put yourself in a position where you're upskilling or diversifying your skill set. And I think that's going to be, certainly for people listening who may find themselves in that situation, it's really something that's worth considering, because a lot of people have heavily relied on their organisations to cross-skill them and to transfer roles. And actually, we may see a shift change there, particularly, I hate to use this term, but it's going to be an employer's market.
Yes, it is. It's going to be very competitive. And certainly, just to share some things that I've been doing, it's now been, coming up 6 months since I actually physically left the business. I was financially supported for a little while, but actually right from the word go, I wanted to create a job of work, finding a new job. So put structure into my day, getting up as normal, doing some physical exercise to keep those endorphins and keep the pounds at bay, but also then sitting down, creating targets of which organisations, which search or recruitment firms and practices I was going to reach out to. Clearly making sure my CV, I built a profile on a page so that people didn't have to wade through a very long CV. By the time you get to my age, we're into 4 or 5 pages worth of activities you've done. Making the network part of that day of work, so not seeing that as a wasteful activity, but a really meaningful activity, helping others in that as well. So continuing to coach and mentor people as I do, and being very reciprocal. If a role that I heard about wasn't right for me, who could I recommend for it? Who could I pick it, flick it onto? Because I do believe in karma, and what goes round comes round. And I also believe that when you help others, it does make you feel better, which is another thing that's come out quite clearly through this crisis, hasn't it? With people, volunteering and being very selfless in many situations. So, I'd advise anybody to, see getting another job as a job in itself, and allow yourself rest from that as well. It can become incredibly wearing, not just when you get a knockback, and obviously it's hard not to take that personally when you've been in a process, you've invested a lot of time emotionally and physically in researching the company, interviewing with people, following up. It is a bit of a slap in the face when you're not the lucky one who gets the call, and so giving yourself time to sort of grieve for that opportunity and what might have been, dust yourself down, have a day off of it perhaps, and then come again.
I'll let Bevan Dove talk again in a minute, but I've just got one more thing, which is around the mental health impact of the situation. And I see that you take proactive action, which is something that I'll always advocate for, people taking proactive action, investing in themselves, all of the things that you've done and taking time, but also taking time to rest and nourish yourself physically and emotionally as well. Now, one of the challenges is the level of rejection, which as humans is very, very challenging for us to have that amount of rejection. But ultimately, if we have a realistic view on it, it's a numbers game to an extent. And we're in a position where 11,000 people got made redundant in 48 hours. Now, those people are going to go back to the job market and there's going to be rejection. I'm just interested to sort of see what you've done to sort of help cope with that.
Well, I got down to the final two for a FTSE 100 business in January. And the CEO had been incredibly encouraging and given me signals that, to be fair, I thought I'd got it in the bag. And at the 11th hour, he made a different decision and went for somebody else. That was tough. I mean, I can't dress that up. It was tough. But when I then unpicked, well, what was it that candidate had that I didn't have? It came down to a foreign language. They spoke French and I didn't. 40% of the businesses in France. So it really was about, giving myself a strong talking to. There wasn't anything I could do. I put my best foot forward and taking the successes out. I'd beaten off a long shortlist, and I'd got down to the final two. Therefore, my profile and my performance throughout that search obviously was good, or I wouldn't have got into that. And the feedback, properly listening to the feedback, was you had everything but that language. Now, clearly, you can't suddenly go out and teach yourself a new language, but what could I teach myself coming out of my experience with Virgin was I didn't have agile. Other HR practitioners do. So what skills can I equip myself with? And that's when I started undertaking the agile practitioner training. But being open to, if you don't put yourself up for things and don't open yourself up to risks, you won't be giving yourself those opportunities. So I took a week off in February at half term. The children, though, I sort of gifted myself, like you say, that opportunity to say, I'm going to shut the laptop. I'm going to, switch off LinkedIn for a week and just breathe a bit, go for some walks. We luckily had some lovely weather, sorry, it wasn't in February. That was before COVID. It was in May, the May half term.
It all blurs. It's all blurs.
Yes, it is, isn't it? The last few months.
Just picking up on something you said there, Catherine, that's quite relevant, I think, is at your level, you talked about getting feedback, but I hear so often people applying for job after job after job and not even getting acknowledgement that their application has been received, let alone feedback on why they weren't fortunate enough to get through the sift or to get to interview. And I just wondered what your thoughts are, on companies almost dismissing people as commodities and not actually treating them like humans.
Well, unfortunately, it's all too common, and I read quite a lot of posts on social media where people are sort of giving up almost because they're applying. You do get some responsible resources who say at the bottom of the ad, but we're getting such high numbers of applicants. Our apologies, you may not hear from us personally, but thank you for your interest, type thing. And it is difficult if you're getting 600 to 700 applicants for a role to be able to respond to each one personally. I think as more senior roles like myself, you do tend to, if you've been in a process, here, but it's also our responsibility to reach out and ask for that feedback and make it part of the process, I guess, as well, so that you can take something from it, even if it is, not good news. But no, I've applied for personally. I've become like a business development director. I write proactively to CEOs, as I said to you earlier, because the number of jobs is just not there. Or when you do apply on LinkedIn, you often don't hear at all. And it is a thankless task, and that's why I think it's about setting yourself those small targets. Right, I'm going to do 3 applications a day or 3 emails a day, and that's my work, and accept that you might not hear back. I've had some CEOs come back in 10 minutes. I wrote to British Airways that were right in the beginning, and I thought they might need some help as obviously part of a business in distress. Alex Cruz came back to me about 10 minutes later with a lovely encouraging note to say, thanks for your interest. I've gone with somebody internally. Sadly, there's a dozen more examples of those I've written to that haven't. But I am seeing some glimmers. I'm in some processes at the moment and some conversations. The phone is starting to ring. So I do think we all need to hold out hope that, we're going to go through ups and downs, aren't we? And those, businesses that might have not been hiring might start, or they might think, actually, I want something different from what I've had, as we go through different stages of the crisis.
I remember a few years ago, when I worked for the MOD, the Air Force closed RAF Cottesmore and got rid of the Harrier aircraft virtually overnight. And I remember the role that I was in was partly to do with resettlement, getting people back, resetting them from military life into civilian life. But the civilian contingent I found really interesting to watch, because there was a huge number of people who had worked in the public sector, and historically the public sector's always had this reputation for being the ultimate in job security, and almost overnight these long-term civil servants found themselves being made redundant. And it was interesting to see the different personality types. There were those who kind of said, okay, this is happening, I'm going to proactively go out and find something else, I'm going to start applying internally, externally, cross-department, the works. There were some that you watched who took a little bit of time for it to sink in. If we think about that change curve, they were in a bit of denial for a little while and then became active. But it was interesting. There was a small contingent who just literally buried their heads right up until the sort of, the very last minute, and then seemed to appear to be quite shocked that they were suddenly made redundant, because it wasn't sudden. It was probably a 6-month process. It was just interesting to see all the different personality types, and those ones that were really literally at the end of the time still burying their heads were actually the ones that were probably the most negative in their response to getting a new job. It was really interesting to watch those personality types.
Well, unfortunately, I think we will see. Oh, sorry, Jeffrey, were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say it's just natural human behaviour, isn't it? And it's, regardless of sector or the country that you live in, and probably your culture, it's just human behaviour. And some people will be very naturally resilient, or they've learned to be more resilient, and there's other people that will just go into denial and then are not mentally or otherwise prepared for when that does happen. But going back to what Catherine you were saying earlier, during COVID, especially in the first probably 6 weeks, there was so much kindness around. There just was so much respect and for other people. And when people said, "How are you?" people actually meant it, rather going, "Hi, how are you?" and not really wanting a response. So it's really interesting that as we go through this, with our friends, our colleagues, whoever, when we recognise people's behaviours, that we kind of help them out a little bit. And sometimes that is maybe a little bit more of a blunt conversation, like you really need to get yourself sorted out now, or it might be more encouraging, depending on your relationship on the and where they're at, their coping strategies and things as well. But I think it's going to be tough for us all individually, regardless of what we do or where we are. But, it's going to be tough for our loved ones, our friends, and colleagues or former colleagues.
And I think Bev mentioned, age, and I think there will be, unfortunately, it will be harder for working women, who are picking up the burden of caring, not universally, but I've been reading a little bit about that this week, that we've seen a bit of a swing back to, women being responsible both for the children that are not at school at the moment, and the household duties, as well as their work. And I also think the older generation will see sadly an increase in the discriminatory practices that we've worked very, very hard to try and reduce. Not universally, but as the unemployed grows, it will be at the fringes, won't it, where we'll see it being more difficult. I mean, I have personally been quite encouraged to see, whether it's people from the travel industry, taking roles at the front line in stores, and doing things, just because to survive they need to. And so I think we'll see, a real mix-up. And, I walk into my local Tesco, and the guy handing me the basket and the hand sanitizer, used to work in finance, is an incredible chap, and he's a real asset to that business, because we're standing there waiting to be admitted, having a a really engaging highbrow conversation each week. I do wonder whether we'll see, that to your point, Bev, people, redeploying themselves into completely different sectors and reinventing themselves, and maybe it's again this reciprocal piece around trying to encourage a more flexible approach rather than people thinking, well, I'll only just do what I did before. No, reskill and go do something else if you're not getting cut through in businesses.
I think there's a danger as well that certainly for the old generation, I know I keep harping on, maybe it's because I'm feeling old today. I think there's sometimes a lack of ability to see where their transferable skills can transfer. Certainly going back to my story before, they'd worked in the public sector for a long time and couldn't see how those skills could transfer into the private sector. So we helped coach almost, I suppose, like career coaching to help them identify their transferable skills and find ways to market themselves so those competences were relevant across sectors, because we do tend to get very set in our ways, and we sometimes, there's a great saying and I love it, is you can't read the label from inside the jar. Sometimes I think you need somebody else to tell you what those skills are and help you to draw them out and put them into we're marketing, aren't we? We're marketing ourselves, which is hard for some people.
It's really interesting. I did some associate work a couple of years ago to help out people in the public sector who are coming up to retirement, and they were always really, really interesting sessions, and they are myths and legends, and I think we're talking ourselves into them, but I think culturally or within our organisation. So, well, people say, well, it's not corporate, because I've always worked in, going back to what you were saying earlier about working in the RAF, I've always worked in military or in the public sector. And, these people weren't military, but they were other parts of the public sector. So, well, corporate life is so different to us. And unfortunately, one of the benefits of getting older is being around the block a few times and working in a couple of different industries and different sectors. And no, actually, there are some fundamental things that are different. But actually, they're all people going to work with all our different traits and our, weird ways that we have as individuals. But actually, the context, what we do is different, but actually how we go about it is not that different at all. So I think, just being a bit more, or maybe a lot more open-minded and a bit more creative about what we can do rather than what we think we can do. I think really that's going to be a survival technique, from a work perspective. And just thinking quite differently. What skills do I have? What are transferable? And like Bev said, asking other people, somebody else's perspective as well, and maybe somebody who's going to be honest with you as well, not just your partner, or your kids, or your parents, depending on your age, but somebody who's going to tell you the truth. But probably a work colleague who really knows what your transferable skills and capabilities
I think
are.
One of the best questions is asking people how they see you. And not being, it's almost your own what do you call it, self-limiting beliefs, which can reduce those opportunities and or perspective that we have. But no, I've had in some respects an opportunity in this 6 months to first of all build greater connections with my family. As a mum who's worked for my 17-year-old's entire life, I'd never done the school run. Obviously, COVID's put paid to that, but it for a couple of months, January, February, March, that was fantastic, and it's been really enjoyable to build more meaningful relationships with the family and spend time with them. Yes, I won't, relish the domestic drudgery. Probably have more respect for those mums who've not worked during that time and realise just how hard it is. I've always had a nanny, and been fortunate to have that support. The constant round of feeding, shopping, preparing food, clearing it up. It is quite draining. When you're the person doing it day in, day out, isn't it? So there are really good takeaways, but it is an interesting trend that most of the people I speak to don't want to go back to normal afterwards either. And I think we will start to see an evolvement of the term new normal. It's all out there, isn't it? But people balancing family, work, health, friendship, development time in a much more blended way going forward, whether it's the 4-day week movement, and that could help with the job market as well, couldn't it? Because if everybody did, a little bit less, then there are more roles to go around. And so there could be some interesting trends that emerge, both from an individual perspective, where we want something different as employees, whether that's in leadership roles or shop floor roles, but also that businesses then think, actually, I could, rather than making redundancies, if everybody dropped down 20%, from a payment point of view, but also from a work point of view, could we get a win-win? I think it'd be great to see some HR officers being a bit more creative and business leaders about how they're tackling some of the challenges and improving employee experience at the same time.
Yeah. I saw a survey from an online HR magazine beginning of this week, I think it was, and it says that of the people that were surveyed, they say that they're saving money not going to work, because like where we had the conversation yesterday, people aren't commuting, so obviously there's, and it depends where you live and where you work. That could be a lot of money, from Peterborough to London. That's with car parking about £13,000 a year. You're going to commute into London every day. But even if you're not doing that, if you're just driving to work, you're just paying for coffees and things. So, people are saying that as a minimum, they're saving about £1,400 a year, but by not traveling into work. And in the survey, people are saying, I'm actually willing to take a bit of a pay decrease if it means I can work from home a little bit more. So I think, there's that creativity on the individual's part, the employer or potential employee's part, but also on hiring managers, but certainly from a HR leadership or a business leadership team, it is thinking about, well, we can do this or we can do this. It's not black and white like that anymore. It's just
it's not let's slash 1,000 jobs. No, if we're a big organisation and we do whether it's a voluntary process or I think you'd get a lot of people signing up. Yeah. Particularly if it meant saving, the enterprise wide, security for the future of the business. Now, I certainly think some of those trends were starting. They've been doing pilots in the Far East on the 4-day week, and I think some businesses have proved that productivity actually goes up, health of the workforce goes up. So instead of having, this is my well-being strategy over here, and this is my wage strategy, workforce strategy over here, they're all starting to come together, aren't they? As a sort of, holistic, if you like, approach. And so, those are some of the more positive elements, I guess, that are coming out of this amount of change.
Absolutely. And within that as well, you have got people, we were talking about working mums and things before, people who have got caring responsibilities or whatever it might be, have not had the opportunity to go out and get a full-time job 5 days a week because that just wasn't available to them. However, now, for savvy employers, they could be having somebody, or maybe it was a finance director, as an example, for 10, 15 years, or then has decided to have a family, but only wants to come back to work for 2-3 days a week, or a job share. Well, there's so many different opportunities. And I think the savvy hiring managers and businesses will now start to look at actually who else is out there rather than
broader talent pools. They've said certainly that remote working has given us finally we've all embraced it 100% because we've had to, whereas there was so many businesses that were resisting it and still had the presenteeism, particularly in large corporates in financial services, especially where I've spent a lot of my career. It used to drive me bonkers. It was a BGL group, it was like British Leyland, wasn't it? The klaxon would go off at 5:30 and the car park would be jammed as people, had to be at their desks until, 5:29. Absolutely crazy. Used to drive me mad. But the whole world has accelerated the remote working, and that means we can recruit from people. Work is not where you go; it's what you do, and that's been thoroughly proved. Which can only be good for, as you say, underrepresented groups, particularly whether that's women, whether that's parts of the demographic that we wouldn't have been able to reach before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which links back nicely to previous podcasts. Actually, talk about diversity and inclusion of minorities and other groups as well. Yeah, interesting. I heard
Nice.
I heard a great quote yesterday. It's for people who think that we are now working flexibly during COVID, it's not working flexibly. We just changed our location. So I thought that is such an obvious statement. But actually, we're not flexible working at all at the moment. We are forced to work at home for those of us who can work from home. So I think it'd be interesting as we start to migrate back into whatever the next 6 months and beyond is going to bring us. It's that mindset that we haven't been working flexibly. We've just changed where we're working. So I think as we start from a HR or a business perspective to start to think about actually what is our policy around this. Working from home is not flexible working. It's not either or. Flexible working is a much bigger topic than that.
Mm.
That was
one of the things that oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Catherine.
Well, one of the things I have noticed is that when we're on all of these Zoom sort of calls, your family are around. You cannot pretend they don't exist. And yet people's reactions to a child coming in the background, or a noise going off, or a dog barking, or, someone being more informally dressed, does feel we're being more accepting. And so there's this sort of sense of slightly more empathetic leadership and or behaviour peer-to-peer coming through, that we are our whole selves. And I think that would be something that I hope, if we do go back into an office environment or a manufacturing plant or whatever, that we don't lose that, because I think we've made a bit of a step change and become more conscious that people are, have other roles in their life. They're not just your employee. They're a mum, a sister, a dad, a brother, whatever. And that's been encouraging. I don't know. I mean, from a leadership perspective, definitely you do a lot of leadership training. Whether that's something that you're seeing, coming through in content around that type of conversation.
Yeah, the conversation kind of then leaches out into, will people learn, i.e. will leadership learn from this experience and take all the great things from it, or will we revert to type? Will we go back? When the government says we can all go back to work and everybody is back to work, probably not as we were before, but in some form. Will people, especially people who are kind of more stuck in their ways, to be blunt, we're saying, right, everybody back to work, we're doing the 9 to 5, I want everybody at their desks at 9 o'clock, everybody's going to leave at 5:30 or whatever it might be. Will we do that? And I think it'll be really interesting to see that, and I think we've touched upon this in previous podcasts, where the businesses who have embraced the change and will continue to evolve that so it works well for the business and the customers and the employees as well, they, I think, will be the ones that succeed in the future. Whereas the ones who kind of go, right, back into work, 9 to 5, sit at your desk where I can see you, I think they'll suffer and might survive that, because there's the employee choice now. And interestingly, on a forum I was on yesterday, and I've seen a lot of research as well, most people don't want to go back to it the way they were before. And actually interesting, at the moment, most people don't even want to go back to work because what Peter was saying earlier about anxiety. So actually, if anybody thinks that people are going to go back to work the way they were before, I think they need to have a look in the mirror, I think, because it's definitely going to change.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say was, I think we use this working from home tag, but in reality, during lockdown, it's not been working from home. People have been trying to be at home and work, which is slightly different, isn't it? If you have a normal, if your terms and conditions are that you work from home, then you probably wouldn't have the school kids being homeschooled at the same time as you're trying to do your job, and you wouldn't have your husband who's being furloughed asking for cups of tea every 2 minutes. You would be working from home as opposed to trying, being at home trying to work. And I think there is a subtle difference there, which might put some people off from the work from home option, when actually it's not a real work from home. I've worked from home now for 2 years, and it was great because my son was normally out and my husband was out, and I had the house to myself. And of course, lately things have changed, and it's not a true reflection of work from home, I don't think.
I'm feeling quite jealous of my husband, who gets to leave the house and go to work. I'm craving the opportunity to escape from the never-ending. What's for lunch, mum? And what's for tea, mum? Yeah. Can I have a snack, mum? But yeah, no, look, yeah. You're absolutely right. I think we'll all want something that's a balance between back to social interaction, time out of what can at times start to close in on us, and or but feeling safe and not having the anxiety of being exposed to greater levels of risk than we've had imposed upon us. You can see the lockdown as a containment, or you can see it as something that's been keeping us safe. And it will be very interesting to see how this starts to unravel, as businesses want people back in a physical workplace. I don't think it will ever be the same, actually. I think, it will be very sad if it is, but I think organisations, certainly the big, roundtables of CHROs that I've been attending in recent weeks, they're talking about a much more, a working day that expands to allow people to come in safely and go home safely at different times, only coming together for the work that really needs to be done together, whether that's the sort of innovation and creativity and teamworky type stuff. But actually our email, why would we ever go into an office to sit at a screen when you can sit at a screen very safely somewhere else? And that does change economic factors as well. I mean, you talk about saving money from a travel perspective. I've saved a fortune not buying 4 coffees and a sandwich every day. Will we ever go back to some of that? We've managed without it. So will we see those businesses having to reinvent themselves a little bit to survive? They're talking about Pret will start to open in the evenings now because people are just not spending the money in those businesses any longer.
Yeah. I think, is there a danger that we throw the baby out with the bathwater? I worry that we're going to go too far away from the workplace and too much into home working. I know it's not going to be possible for all businesses, but just going back to getting together with you guys earlier this week, that was a real buzz for me. And I think if there's a danger that we enforce home working as the norm, then we're almost kind of going too far the other way. And you talked about finding that balance, Catherine. I think there does have to be a balance between working away from the office and having time in the office and or in the workplace. So you get that sort of that balance of interaction and connection.
Definitely. I think organisations need to really take heed and adapt, and now is their opportunity, rather than making mass redundancies, to actually look at the way they do business and to adapt and improve their processes and to improve the way that they embrace their workforce and their talent. And I think there's going to be smaller businesses that are looking to disrupt them by taking that talent and giving them but more meaningful work. And certainly as a small business owner who has aspirations of becoming a medium business in the near future, certainly I'd be looking at that talent pool and thinking, can I give them more purpose? Can I give them more flexibility? And can I give them more meaningful work? And I think that that there is a decentralization of big business that I think is quite a risk for them at the moment. With the onset of the internet, I am able to compete with bigger and bigger businesses as a small business and as an employer as well, who has 2 new members of staff moving from bigger organizations choosing to come and support my business and my vision, and I'm going to give them flexible, meaningful, purposeful work where they're not going to be, it's outcome based. It's not based on a 9 to 5 and in at this time and out at that time and what have you. And I think that bigger businesses got the opportunity now to really review what they're doing and see how they fit into the new way of working moving forward. One of the questions I just wanted to ask you, Catherine, was actually, what is it you're looking for and what are you hoping to get moving forward?
Oh, thank you, Pete. I have 3 children and a mortgage still, so I do need to earn a certain amount of salary. So unfortunately, I'm not able to go and do some of the more creative things that I might want to do quite yet. I do need another big gig for about 5 years. So a chief people officer role with an organisation. But love the technology sector. Whether it's been telco and cable or insurance. I think something digital, something customer centric. I'm not really an HR professional that's worked in industry like manufacturing and big employee relations agendas. I'm much more front facing, but pretty sector agnostic, to be fair, whether it's retail where I spent my early career or financial services or more latterly in media. But yeah, I'd like another crack. I enjoy leading teams and building teams. I had 250 HR folks at Virgin. That was a big team, and I like to think I left it better than I found it. Whether that grow or the actual, credibility and way that the function was perceived as a much more strategic partner to those business leaders. When I announced I was moving on in April on my last day, I had over 350 messages from people, personal messages, which are very heartwarming to reread when I have one of those slightly darker moments of, oh, am I ever going to get another job? What's wrong with me? Why didn't I get that job? And it's lovely at times to look back on the legacy and feel very proud. Thanks for that question. It gives me a chance to say, anybody who's listening who hears of anything, push it my way, please.
And how can they do that? How can they get in touch with you, Catherine?
I'm on LinkedIn quite actively, and my email is catherinelynchhrd@gmail.com.
Brilliant. We'll put those in the.
Well,
we'll put your comment,
you
your
for joining us,
contacts in the links.
Wherever you will end up, you'll do a great job. Speaking from personal
Yeah.
experience, your energy and your enthusiasm is infectious.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for joining us, Catherine. So as always, we just finished the podcast with a look back to see what we've learned. And sometimes this can be a little bit random, so I'm always interested to see what we've all learned in the last week before we close this week's podcast. Who would like to go first?
Go on, Bev.
You always make me go first, and it doesn't give me enough thinking time.
I was hoping you'd give me some inspiration.
Okay, I've learned it's perfectly possible to survive on 450 calories for one day. There you go. That's what I've learned.
No
I'm going to show you what I've learned next. We've been doing, like lots of people, doing family Zoom quizzes or Skype quizzes on the weekends. And we had such a random question last week. And for those of you that are in the UK and some other countries, you might know who Postman Pat is. He's a kid's TV character. And the question was, what was Postman Pat's second name? And we're like, did he have a second name? So I learned this week that Postman Pat's second name is Clifton. So if that ever crops up in a pub quiz or a family quiz, you know that his second name. That's what I learned this week.
Go on, beat that, Pete.
So I'm reading a brilliant book by 50 Cent, okay? And I've got a passage that I took a photo of last night whilst I was reading it. Push beyond your limits and your self-belief. Your sense of who you are will determine your actions and what you end up getting in life. If you see your reach as limited, that you are mostly helpless in the face of so many difficulties, that it is best to keep your ambitions low, then you'll receive the little that you expect. Knowing this, you must train yourself for the opposite. Ask for more, aim high, and believe that you are destined for something great. Your sense of self-worth comes from you alone, never the opinion of others. With a rising confidence in your abilities, you will take risks that will increase your chances of success. People follow those who know where they are going, so cultivate an air of certainty and boldness, which I thought was quite a nice way to conclude this.
Far more philosophical than my fasting and just Postman Pat.
Absolutely.
It's quite meaningful anyway to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Same time, same place next week. Subscribe if you can, and also leave some feedback on the podcast. Catherine, thank you for joining us, and
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Catherine. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Stronger for Business podcast. A final thought before we go. In the words of Henry Ford, anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. So, stay young and join us next Friday for our next episode of the Stronger for Business podcast.